So imagine for just a second that you are holding these architectural blueprints, right? Like for a brand new, just absolutely pristine house.
Right, like the ultimate dream house.
Exactly. Every single line on that paper is perfectly drawn. The angles are exact, the foundation is solid, the wiring is totally flawless.
You can just picture the ideal life you're going to live inside those walls.
Yeah, totally safe from the elements. But then right after the house is built and you finally move in, you notice this tiny hairline fracture in the foundation.
Oh, man. The worst nightmare for a homeowner.
Right. It's this internal flaw. And it's quiet, almost imperceptible at first. You kind of tell yourself, oh, it's just the house settling.
Sure, just try to ignore it.
Exactly. But then, before you even have time to patch it, you literally watch in horror as the structural integrity just fails entirely and the actual walls start caving in on the people living inside.
It escalates so fast.
It really does. And welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are exploring that exact progression, taking you through excerpts from a source called Fractured Brotherhood: The Genesis of Human Conflict.
It's such a compelling source text to work through.
It really is, because our mission today is to look at Genesis chapter 4. And we're pulling this apart not just as some, dusty ancient story, but to explore it as a profoundly deep observation on the very origins of human conflict.
Right, looking at the psychology of violence and the ultimate breakdown of community.
Yeah. I mean, it's really easy to look at a 3,000-year-old text and just write it off as primitive history. But the reality is the psychological mechanisms detailed in this ancient document, they map onto our modern world with terrifying accuracy.
They absolutely do, and the progression laid out in our source is incredibly stark when you view it through that architectural lens you just mentioned.
Okay, let's unpack this. How does the source actually map out that blueprint analogy?
Well, we begin with the cosmic order and human purpose established in Genesis 1 and 2, right? That is the pristine house, the ideal structure.
Right, where everything is functioning exactly as it should.
Exactly. But then we move to Genesis 3, which the source describes as the internal break.
The hairline fracture.
Yes, it is the temptation of the self, the decision to define good and evil on human terms rather than divine terms. That's the crack in the foundation.
Oh, I see. Because it happens internally first, before anyone really notices the damage.
Exactly. And because foundations support literally everything above them, that internal rupture inevitably brings us to Genesis 4, which is the external break.
Where the walls actually come down.
Right. It is the immediate horizontal consequence of the internal flaw. You get the absolute breakdown of the human community. We move from an enclosed, safe space right out into the messy, exposed, and deeply complicated world of human production and civilization.
Wow. So the ideal broke internally in the previous chapter, and now the people are standing in the rubble.
They're completely outside the garden.
Yeah, having to actually figure out how to survive in a world that is suddenly, really hostile to them. And the story that kicks off this new reality, this shift from the garden to the city, is the story of Cain and Abel.
Which is such a famous narrative, but often so misunderstood.
For sure, because our source notes that this narrative contains the very first mention of a religious ritual in the text. But wait, hang on. I've always heard this framed as like an ancient workplace rivalry.
Right, the classic farmer versus shepherd dynamic.
Yeah, like they're just getting jealous over who brought the better goods to the harvest festival or whatever. Are you saying the text links the origin of murder directly to the religious ritual itself?
It is entirely tied to the ritual. Because, well, the ritual represents the desperate need for access to the divine.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the disruption that happened back in Genesis 3, it didn't actually sever humanity's desire for God. The psychological longing for connection, for approval, and for a sense of cosmic order, that was still completely intact.
They still wanted that relationship.
Exactly. But because they are outside the garden, human interaction with the divine has become deeply distorted. The direct line of communication is just gone.
So they have to kind of make something up.
Right. So they invent a ritual bringing sacrifices to try and bridge that terrifying gap. The conflict between Cain and Abel is fundamentally this zero-sum anxiety over who has divine favor in a world that feels completely abandoned.
Wow. So the struggle of the field, as it's often called, becoming the struggle of the brother, is basically displacement.
Yes, that is exactly the psychological mechanism.
It's kind of like, I don't know, getting humiliated by your boss at work, but you can't yell back because they hold all the power. So you go home and just pick a vicious fight with your roommate over the dishes.
That is a perfect modern parallel.
Because Cain can't strike at God, right? He can't
Yeah.
force the divine to accept his sacrifice or give him the validation he is so desperate for.
No, he's totally powerless in that vertical relationship.
Right. So he strikes at the closest available thing that carries God's image, which is his brother.
What's fascinating here is how the text underscores that psychological displacement beautifully. It traces the physical consequences of the previous chapter right into the emotional realities of this one.
Oh, wait, how so? What physical consequences?
Well, in chapter 3, the consequence of the internal rupture was the cursing of the ground, right? The text says the soil would now produce thorns and thistles.
Right, farming becomes this massive struggle.
Exactly. The human relationship with the earth became a battle. And our source draws attention to the fact that by chapter 4, those physical agricultural thorns and thistles literally manifest as violence and hatred between humans.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, the curse scales from the dirt directly to the human heart. Cain killing Abel isn't just a brother removing a rival for resources.
It's deeper than that.
Much deeper. It is humanity actively rejecting the image of God residing in another human being. When Cain attacks Abel, he is essentially attacking the divine reflection.
Because he can't attack God himself.
Exactly. And at the total collapse of the horizontal relationship, the community is no longer a place of mutual thriving. I mean, it is now a place of lethal competition.
Which means the precedent is officially set, right? The ultimate crime has been committed. The first time a human takes the life of another human.
A massive turning point in the ancient narrative.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though, because if I'm reading, a standard ancient myth from that time period, usually the gods are just throwing lightning bolts the second a human steps out of line or causes a disruption.
Oh, absolutely. Swift and brutal retribution.
Right. So is that what happens here? Does the divine executioner just show up and wipe Cain off the map?
Well, if you look at the surrounding empires of the time, places like ancient Babylon or Sumer, they had their own competing creation myths, right? Like the Enuma Elish or the Epic of Etrahasis.
I vaguely remember studying those in college. Lots of warring gods.
Exactly. And in the ancient Near Eastern context, deities were mostly indifferent to human morality. Humans were generally created just to do the heavy lifting, the manual labor, so the gods could rest.
Basically just slave labor for the divine.
Exactly. In those myths, humans could kill each other all day long, and the gods wouldn't care in the slightest, unless that human violence somehow disturbed the gods' own peace and quiet.
Wait, really? They only cared if it bothered them personally.
Yeah. If the humans multiplied and got too noisy, keeping the gods awake, the gods would literally send a flood or a plague just to quiet things down. They didn't care about the ethical dimension of murder. They just cared about noise control.
That is wild. So in those other stories, the gods are essentially like annoyed upstairs neighbors banging on the floor with a broom.
That's exactly what they are.
Don't care why you're fighting. They just want you to keep the volume down so they can sleep.
Precisely. But the God portrayed in Genesis 4 operates in complete defiance of that cultural expectation.
Okay, how so?
Well, instead of an annoyed upstairs neighbor or an executioner coming to immediately smite Cain for his crime, God enters in the narrative as an inquisitive figure, a questioner.
Oh, right. He asks him questions.
Yes. The text says the voice of Abel's blood is crying out from the ground, so God clearly already knows what has happened. Yet God approaches Cain and asks, "Where is your brother Abel?" And then follows it up with, "What have you done?"
That is such a striking image. It really reminds me of a parent dealing with a child who, just shattered a valuable vase in the living room.
Right, the parent already knows who did it.
Yeah. The parent hears the crash. They walk in and see the broken porcelain scattered everywhere and see the kid standing right next to it with this incredibly guilty look on their face. The parent obviously knows what happened.
There's no mystery to solve.
Exactly. But they still stop and ask, what happened here? You ask the question to give the child a chance to own their actions.
To confess.
Right. To give them a moment to reflect on the reality of the destruction they just caused, rather than just hitting them with a punishment without a single word spoken.
That's a great way to frame it. It is an invitation to moral reckoning. The God of Genesis 4 is intensely concerned with the moral state of the human heart, not just the physical disruption of the world.
Which is totally different from the noise control gods of Babylon.
Completely different. And this leads us to the consequence of the interrogation. Cain refuses to take responsibility, right?
Mm.
He famously asks if he's his brother's keeper.
The ultimate deflection.
Exactly. So he is judged. Because he's spilled blood on the ground will no longer yield its strength to him.
Yeah.
He is exiled, condemned to be a restless wanderer.
A pretty harsh sentence for an ancient farmer.
It is. But then the text introduces a mechanism that completely upends our expectations of ancient divine justice, the mark of Cain.
Right. Cain gets marked.
Because Cain expresses terror that whoever finds him wandering in the wilderness will kill him in retribution. In response, God places a mark on him.
So God marks him. And culturally, we usually use the phrase mark of Cain to mean like a stain of guilt.
Like a brand of shame.
Yeah, exactly. Like a scarlet letter broadcasting to the world that this guy is a murderer. Stay away from him.
It does function as a public identifier of his crime, yes. But our source points out its primary mechanism is actually divine protection.
Protection. Wait, for the murderer?
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the mark is a warning to anyone else that if they harm Cain, they will suffer a vengeance 7 times worse.
Oh, wow. I always thought it was a curse.
It's a paradox, right?
Sorry.
It proves that this God is a relentless pursuer. It signifies that even those who have completely fallen, even those who have caused profound harm and ruptured the community, they remain under God's sovereign eye.
That is fascinating.
Right. Cain is exiled from the community he destroyed, and he is alienated from the soil. But
he isn't just discarded into the void. That completely flips the script on the sort of blind scale of ancient retribution. So, okay. Cain is fundamentally exiled. He has to survive in a hostile world without the ability to farm the cursed soil. How did he actually do that?
Because he doesn't just wander off and die?
Right, he doesn't. The source points out this really fascinating survival mechanism. His family line starts innovating. He goes off and actually builds the first city.
Yes, he builds a city named Enoch, and the narrative begins tracing his lineage.
Which usually just feels like a boring list of names, honestly.
It can feel that way, yeah. But in the context of antiquity, genealogies are rarely just dry lists of names to fill space on a scroll. They are arguments. They carry immense thematic significance.
Okay, so what's the argument here?
The specific genealogy credits Cain's descendants with the foundational developments of human culture and technology.
Okay.
They're given specific names like Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain.
And they invent stuff, right?
Huge stuff. They are credited with inventing nomadic livestock management, the creation of music and the lyre, and the birth of metallurgy, specifically, working with bronze and iron tools.
Okay, stop right there. Because I am looking at these pillars of ancient civilization. Art, industry, and agriculture. The very things that allow humanity to rise above mere survival, right?
The markers of real human progress.
Exactly. And the text attributes all of them to the lineage of the very first murderer. How does the ancient text reconcile the fact that the most violent, broken family line is the one that invents all the greatest cultural advancements?
By recognizing that human culture is an inseparable mix of both brilliance and brutality.
Brilliance and brutality.
Yeah. The ancient authors were remarkably sophisticated in their sociological observation. They understood that the mechanisms of progress are very often driven by necessity and anxiety.
Like survival forces invention.
Exactly. Consider this shift to nomadic livestock management we just mentioned. If you are farming, you stay in one place.
Right, you're tied to the land.
But if you have herds of livestock, those herds eat grass. When they eat all the grass in one area, you have to move them to new grazing lands. As Cain's descendants expand their flocks, they inherently need more territory. So they begin encroaching on lands occupied by others.
Ah, I see where this is going. And when you start encroaching on other people's territory, you inevitably trigger conflict.
It's unavoidable.
The people already living there are obviously going to defend their land, which means the nomads have to adopt a posture of violent defense just to keep their herds alive.
Exactly, the mechanism. The economic model itself forces them into conflict, and that is where the next technological advancement comes into play. Metallurgy.
The bronze and iron tools.
Right. They're working with bronze and iron. Initially, you might forge a bronze tool to help shear a sheep or clear brush, but when you're competing for scarce grazing land, that bronze tool very quickly gets reshaped into a bronze sword.
Man, that's dark.
It is. The technology of industry basically becomes the technology of warfare. The brilliance of inventing metallurgy instantly scales up the lethality of human conflict.
So the same hands that forge the iron can make a plow to feed people, or they can make a spear to slaughter them.
It's all the same knowledge.
The technology itself is completely agnostic, isn't it? It just amplifies whatever the human heart decides to do with it.
And the text makes this amplification explicit by introducing a figure named Lamech.
Okay, who is Lamech?
He is a descendant of Cain, sitting at the absolute pinnacle of this newly forged civilization. We see the dual nature of progress in full effect with him.
He's sort of the poster child for it.
Very much so. The exact same lineage that builds the first city, plays the first music, and develops bronze weapons, produces a man who completely weaponizes the culture itself.
Wait, weaponizes the culture? How?
Well, Lamech uses the newly invented art form of poetry and music, not to praise the divine, but to compose a terrifying boast.
Oh, the source quotes the actual poem, right? I think it's called The Song of the Sword. What exactly is he bragging about in this song?
He gathers his wives and essentially sings this dark war anthem. He boasts, "I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold." Truly Lamech 77-fold.
77-fold, wow.
Right. Notice what he's doing here. Cain killed his brother out of a twisted sense of religious anxiety, and God offered him a sevenfold protection to stop a cycle of blood feuds.
Put a lid on the violence.
Exactly. Lamech takes that divine grace, strips God out of the equation entirely, and claims a 77-fold vengeance for himself, backed by the new bronze weapons his family just invented.
Okay, so let me get this straight. Cain kills one person in a field and tries to hide the body because he is terrified of what he did.
Yes, he feels the weight of it.
Right. But Lamech kills a young man merely for striking him, and then he writes a hit song bragging about the disproportionate violence.
He practically throws a parade for himself.
He is essentially saying, I don't need God's mark of protection. I have a bronze sword. If you give me a black eye, I will wipe out your entire bloodline.
That's his exact posture.
He just scales up the arrogance, the pride, and the sheer volume of the violence.
He does. He completely embodies the terrifying reality that human progress, the building of cities, the creation of art, the advancement of technology, none of it actually solves the fundamental internal fracture that happened back in Genesis 3.
It just gives us sharper tools.
Exactly. We have this persistent modern assumption that as we get smarter, as we build better tools, better infrastructure, and more complex societies, we will naturally become more enlightened and peaceful.
We assume education and tech will save us.
We assume they are the cures for human malice. But Genesis 4 observes that progress doesn't solve the human problem. It just gives us more efficient, widespread, and devastating ways to harm one another.
It takes the struggle of the brother from two guys in a field with a rock and gives it bronze and iron upgrades.
It completely systematizes the violence.
Man. So we started this deep dive holding the blueprints of a perfect, peaceful house in Genesis 1 and 2, right?
The ideal vision.
Yeah. But by the time we reach the end of chapter 4, as our source summarizes, that idyllic garden is just a distant, unreachable memory.
It's gone.
The walls haven't just caved in. The rubble has basically been repurposed to build a fortress. Humanity is no longer living in a quiet, enclosed paradise in communion with the divine. We are now living in the incredibly complex, noisy, anxiety-driven world of cities, of demanding industries, and of deeply entrenched social conflict.
The horizontal breakdown is entirely complete. The text leaves us with a profound and honestly quite sobering view of humanity.
Yeah, it doesn't pull any punches.
It really doesn't. The image of God still exists within us that hasn't been erased, which is why murder remains a profound violation. But our condition is now permanently marred by the inescapable reality of our own brokenness.
The crack in the foundation is permanent.
Exactly. The brilliance is undeniably there. The capacity for gorgeous music, breathtaking architecture, and life-saving innovation is literally woven into our DNA. But so is the capacity for tremendous calculated brutality. The two are walking hand in hand out of the ancient world and directly into our own.
It's basically a mirror held up to society. The ancient writers are showing us that the exact same dynamic of the foundation cracking and the walls caving in happens in every single generation, just with updated architecture.
That's so true. And this raises an important question, I think, for everyone listening today.
I'd love to hear it.
Building on the source's assertion that ancient metallurgy and bronze allowed Lamech to scale up his violence and his pride to unprecedented levels, we really have to look critically at our own era.
Oh, absolutely.
The ancient paradox of brilliance and brutality hasn't gone anywhere. As our modern tools like artificial intelligence, global social media networks, instantaneous communication, as they continue to advance at lightning speed, we have to ask ourselves, are we primarily using these tools to build genuine human connection and repair the broken community?
Or are we just building better swords?
Exactly. Or are we simply inventing much more sophisticated, far-reaching, and emotionally devastating ways to scale up that ancient struggle of the brother? How does the story of Lamech map onto the technologies you use every single day to interact with the people around you?
Wow, that is a deeply unsettling question to carry with you. Are the tools in our pockets helping us fix the foundation, or are they just giving us a more efficient way to tear down the walls? Thank you so much for joining us as we worked through this incredible source material. It's a heavy topic, but understanding these ancient blueprints is really the first step to seeing our modern world and maybe our own hearts a little more clearly. We'll catch you on the next deep dive. New Light.